December 7, 1943. General George C. Marshall, serving as Chief of Staff of the United States Army, received communication from President Franklin Roosevelt in the nation's capital. Roosevelt had recently attended the Tehran conference where discussions took place with Churchill and Stalin. The message conveyed Roosevelt's decision regarding command authority for the planned invasion of France. This selection would influence how the conflict concluded, how many American servicemen would perish in French territory, how many additional months of fighting would occur, whether Soviet mechanized forces would advance only to Berlin or continue westward to the English Channel. Marshall comprehended the magnitude of this determination. This represented more than simply appointing a commanding officer. This involved deciding between military optimization and political requirement, between the general capable of achieving victory most rapidly and the general capable of maintaining alliance cohesion. For an extended period, widespread assumption held that Marshall himself would receive the assignment. He represented the apparent selection. Having directed the Army since 1939, he had expanded American military capability from 200,000 personnel into a force of millions. He had formulated comprehensive strategy, selected field commanders, and supervised activities spanning 2 oceans and multiple continents. The British Prime Minister had designated him the organizer of triumph. The France invasion represented the culmination of everything Marshall had constructed. Roosevelt desired Marshall for the position, yet Roosevelt also recognized he could not spare Marshall from the capital. America's global military efforts depended upon Marshall's strategic direction and his capacity to coordinate the joint military leadership. Roosevelt expressed this sentiment to Marshall directly, stating he could not rest comfortably if Marshall were absent from Washington. Consequently, the decision fell to Lieutenant General Dwight Eisenhower. He currently served as Allied commander in Mediterranean operations. He possessed no experience commanding combat forces prior to 1942. During the First World War, he had instructed military personnel in Pennsylvania. His professional background consisted entirely of administrative work, tactical planning, and diplomatic coordination, yet he demonstrated caution, diplomatic finesse, and proficiency at addressing competing personalities and fostering agreement. Roosevelt's selection surprised numerous officers. What about Lieutenant General George S. Patton, Jr., currently commanding the 7th Army in Sicily? Patton possessed a distinguished combat history. He had salvaged the North African effort following the Kasserine Pass setback. He had seized Palermo in 38 days when British commanders projected it would require substantially longer. He had prevailed in each significant engagement in North Africa and Sicily. His soldiers referred to him affectionately as old blood and guts and expressed willingness to follow him anywhere. German command feared him more than any other Allied officer, yet Patton received no consideration for supreme Allied leadership. He did not participate in deliberations. He did not appear on candidate lists. Regardless of his battlefield accomplishments, operational genius, and demonstrated success, achieving rapid victories, George Patton was deemed excessively controversial politically to oversee coalition operations. This assessment had nothing to do with the striking incidents that would become publicly known several weeks afterward. This determination stemmed from knowledge shared by Marshall, Eisenhower, and Roosevelt that the American population remained unaware of. Patton could achieve brilliant tactical victories, yet he lacked ability to coordinate Allied operations. He could not restrain his speech. He could not subordinate personal ambitions to diplomatic requirement. He perceived coalition military operations as a competitive scenario, where American forces should assert supremacy and British forces should assume secondary positions. He manipulated war journalists as instruments for self-promotion. He made inflammatory remarks about allies without considering repercussions. Patton represented an operational master. However, Supreme Command demanded significantly more than operational mastery. It demanded handling Churchill's ego and de Gaulle's pride. It demanded building agreement among officers holding divergent strategic perspectives. It demanded accepting militarily suboptimal solutions to safeguard alliance solidarity. Patton possessed capability in none of these areas. He expressed no interest in acquiring any of these capabilities. He felt resentment about necessity to engage in any of these endeavors. Consequently, Roosevelt selected Eisenhower, and Patton would dedicate the conflict implementing strategic frameworks others created rather than formulating his own. He would demonstrate repeatedly that his dynamic techniques could have expedited conclusion of hostilities. However, he would never possess authority to influence comprehensive strategy. Roosevelt and Marshall had engaged in a strategic calculation. They prioritized selecting the commander capable of sustaining coalition partnerships over the commander capable of achieving military victory most expeditiously. And this calculation would result in thousands of additional American casualties over the subsequent 18 months. This account explains why George S. Patton Jr., perhaps America's preeminent field commander during World War II, was never seriously contemplated for supreme command. Not because his tactical capabilities fell short, but because military victory demanded more than battlefield mastery. It demanded managing coalition diplomacy. And Patton demonstrated fundamental inability to acknowledge that political compromises took precedence over military advantage. To comprehend Patton's exclusion, one must understand the actual George Patton, not the Hollywood portrayal, the authentic individual, and the authentic difficulties he presented for the armed forces' senior officials. George Smith Patton Jr. entered the world in 1885 in a privileged California household possessing historical military connections. He completed studies at the Military Academy and graduated in 1909 with a reputation as a competitive, ambitious officer who regarded warfare as humanity's greatest endeavor. During the First World War, Patton oversaw tank operations and represented one of the initial American military leaders grasping mechanized combat strategy. Throughout the interwar period, Patton engaged in intensive military studies. He absorbed written works concerning Napoleon, Hannibal, Caesar, and Alexander. He considered himself to possess comprehension of warfare exceeding his peers. He professed conviction that he had inhabited previous incarnations as historical warriors and had participated in battles at Carthage and Troy. He shared this conviction openly. He possessed unquestionable faith in it. His character presented significant complexity. He demonstrated profanity and memorable statements. He selected distinctive uniforms featuring polished footwear and pearl-handled firearms. He demanded excellence from subordinates and trained them with greater intensity than any alternative American leader. He cultivated an image as a warrior philosopher with passion for combat. Simultaneously, he struggled with profound insecurity. He experienced significant dyslexia that caused difficulty with reading throughout his existence. He compensated through memorization of material. He engaged in thorough study because reading presented challenges. The combative personality was partially genuine and partially manufactured to conceal his reading impairment and apprehension that peers considered him intellectually inadequate. By 1942, after America's entry into the global conflict, Patton had reached 57 years of age. He had invested 33 years in the military, educating commanders in mechanized operations and authoring instructional materials on tank strategy. He possessed superior comprehension of rapid military operations compared to any American field leader and maintained absolute certainty about his destiny for significance. The difficulty was Patton's absence of self-regulation. He expressed his viewpoint candidly. He disparaged allied forces. He disregarded directives he opposed. He transmitted classified material to reporters to enhance his personal renown. He employed war journalists as mechanisms for generating favorable publicity. He contended with additional generals for public recognition and accolades. Most significantly, Patton exhibited no grasp of coalition diplomacy. He disregarded British preoccupations. He dismissed French sensitivity. He showed indifference towards Soviet requests for immediate Western military action. He concentrated on efficient German elimination and decisive battlefield victories. Everything else represented diplomatic maneuvering that held no interest for him. Marshall possessed comprehensive knowledge of this. Eisenhower possessed equivalent knowledge. They had interacted with Patton for extended periods. They recognized his exceptional performance in combat settings and his problematic behavior in command centers. They understood he would achieve military victories and antagonize allied partners. They understood he embodied America's superior combat officer and the most unsuitable selection for a function demanding diplomatic proficiency. Thus, they formulated a strategy. Leverage Patton where his capabilities possessed significance. Exclude him from positions where his limitations could harm the partnership. Grant him responsibility for armies. Withhold from him authority over geographic regions. This represented a logical assessment grounded on Patton's observed patterns, yet it simultaneously constituted a determination that would create complications for American military approach throughout the remainder of the conflict. In November 1942, Patton obtained his first wartime battlefield position. He commanded the Western Task Force for Operation Torch, the Allied incursion into North Africa. His forces disembarked near Casablanca in Morocco, while British and American troops established positions further east at Oran and Algiers. The Casablanca operation presented complications. Vichy French soldiers defended Morocco, and the circumstance was diplomatically sensitive. Roosevelt expressed reluctance to alienate French military personnel who might potentially declare allegiance to the Allies. Patton received instruction to restrict losses and minimize military force application. Patton prioritized military aims over diplomatic considerations. He assaulted the coastline aggressively and overcame French opposition in 4 days. Casablanca surrendered. French forces in Morocco capitulated. Patton demonstrated himself as the American officer generating tangible outcomes. Yet the genuine assessment emerged subsequently in March 1943. American military units in Tunisia experienced significant setbacks at Kasserine Pass. German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had penetrated American positions and displayed the inexperience of American soldiers in confrontation with battle-hardened German soldiers. American losses were substantial. Military confidence suffered. Senior Allied officials questioned American combat effectiveness against German opponents. Eisenhower required someone capable of restoring control and morale. He assigned Patton to assume command of the Second Corps. Patton arrived March 6, 1943, and swiftly modified the unit. He implemented rigid uniform requirements. He enforced discipline. He discharged officers through court proceedings for exhibiting fear. He personally inspected forward military positions and terminated commanders demonstrating inadequate aggression. In merely 2 weeks, the Second Corps became transformed. Patton led them in activities near El Geta where they prevented German counterattack and caused heavy German losses. American soldiers halted retreating and commenced winning. Patton had demonstrated that American servicemen could fight effectively. They merely required inspired leadership. Yet Patton's accomplishment extended beyond tactical success. He re-established American confidence following the Kasserine humiliation. He demonstrated to British commanders that American military forces could contend with German experienced soldiers. He proved that rapid movement and aggressive tactics could overcome German operational superiority. Marshall and Eisenhower made mental notes. Patton was demonstrating exceptional worth as a field commander. Yet the North Africa effort simultaneously exposed the political complication with Patton. He contended with British commanders for recognition. He expressed dissatisfaction, accepting Eisenhower's authority. He authorized journalists to conduct interviews without authorization. He objected to logistical distribution. He communicated clearly his conviction that he warranted authority over all North African operations. Eisenhower required constant management of Patton. He required smoothing interpersonal tensions with British officers. He required explaining away Patton's public declarations. He required balancing Patton's field accomplishment against the diplomatic complications he generated. However, accomplishments proved irrefutable. Patton had changed a beaten, discouraged military unit into an effective fighting force within 14 days. When North Africa fell in May 1943, Patton's standing as America's premier field commander was established. The subsequent question concerned his assignment. In July 1943, the Allies commenced operations in Sicily. Patton commanded the American Seventh Army. British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery commanded the Eighth Army. Eisenhower oversaw the complete operation. The strategic aim involved controlling Sicily, forcing Italy from the conflict, and readying for the eventual France invasion. The strategy awarded Montgomery the primary northern path toward Messina. Patton's forces received a secondary function, protecting Montgomery's western boundary. It constituted a conservative approach, intended to permit the seasoned British commander to lead, while American forces developed experience. Patton despised it. He considered it a display of British superiority and Eisenhower's reluctance to trust American forces with significant responsibilities. He determined to disregard the intent of his instructions and race Montgomery toward Messina. Should he succeed initially, he would establish American military superiority over British forces and position himself as the prominent Allied commander. Patton drove his troops relentlessly. He advanced up Sicily's western edge, while Montgomery's forces encountered difficulties in the east. Patton occupied Palermo in quick sequence. He pushed his divisions with negligible downtime. He permitted elevated losses to sustain pace. And on August 17, 1943, Patton's forces arrived at Messina hours ahead of Montgomery. It constituted an extraordinary field achievement. Patton had traversed greater territory, battled in additional engagements, and achieved the objective first. He had supplanted Montgomery and demonstrated American military superiority to British forces. American publications praised him as a national hero. His photograph appeared on Time magazine's front cover. He became the symbol of American military achievement. Yet the Sicily effort additionally demonstrated Patton's carelessness. He had extended troops beyond reasonable physical capacity. His casualty totals exceeded necessity because he emphasized pace above methodical organization. He had manufactured a competition with Montgomery that destabilized the partnership. And most problematically, his aggressive pushing of exhausted servicemen produced the circumstances for the episodes that nearly terminated his professional standing. On August 3, 1943, Patton examined the 15th Evacuation Medical Facility near Nicosia. He was inspecting the installation and conferring with injured soldiers. He encountered Private Charles Cool seated on a medical bed without observable injuries. Patton questioned his condition. Cool explained he had experienced excessive stress from artillery bombardment. Patton responded with fury. He designated Cool a coward. He struck Cool across the expression with his leather gloves. He withdrew his firearm and expressed intention to execute him. He commanded Cool to return to the front line immediately. Medical professionals were forced to intervene to prevent Patton from shooting a serviceman experiencing combat psychological injuries. 7 days subsequently, on August 10th, Patton inspected the 93rd Evacuation Medical Facility. He experienced a comparable situation with Private Paul Bennett. who similarly suffered combat psychological trauma without apparent physical damage. Patton replicated the conduct. He struck Bennett. He designated him a coward. He displayed his firearm. He had Bennett forcibly removed from the medical tent. The episodes were witnessed by numerous medical professionals and documented up the authority structure. Eisenhower became informed within several days. Journalists possessed knowledge, but consented to temporarily withhold publication while Eisenhower evaluated options. Eisenhower encountered an impossible circumstance. Patton had recently triumphed in the Sicily operation and represented the most accomplished American commander operating in the theater. Yet he had physically harmed servicemen experiencing psychological injury and had transgressed fundamental protocols of military conduct and medical treatment. According to official guidelines, Patton merited court proceedings and dismissal from active duty. Eisenhower engaged in political calculation. He delivered a confidential reprimand to Patton and mandated apologies to the servicemen, medical staff, and each division within the 7th Army. However, he did not dismiss Patton from command. He did not initiate legal proceedings. He maintained Patton in the theater because he believed Patton was necessary for the France invasion. The determination surfaced in public discourse in November 1943, when radio commentator Drew Pearson disclosed the account during his November 21st broadcast. The American population reacted with fury. Congressional representatives demanded Patton's removal. Veterans' organizations called for legal proceedings. The Secretary of War's office experienced overwhelming correspondence demanding Patton's accountability. Yet Eisenhower had formulated his recommendation regarding Supreme Commander, and he had incorporated Patton within his approach for France, not as Supreme Commander, but as an army commander functioning under Eisenhower's supervision. Because Eisenhower considered Patton's operational excellence justified accepting his behavioral shortcomings, Marshall concurred with Eisenhower's evaluation. Patton possessed excessive strategic importance to eliminate. Yet he also demonstrated excessive danger to advance beyond Army authority. The striking episodes furnished Marshall and Roosevelt public explanation for what they already understood. They could reference his impaired judgment, his incapacity to manage his emotions, his dismissal of military protocols. They could clarify why Patton would never receive positions transcending field command. It represented a convenient justification. The authentic explanation involved Patton's character traits, his competitive nature, his incomprehension of coalition diplomacy, characteristics that had consistently excluded him from theater command. Patton was never destined to receive consideration for supreme Allied authority. The striking episodes simply furnished everyone with public justification for a choice that had previously been established based on Patton's essential characteristics. So why did Roosevelt select Eisenhower instead of maintaining Marshall in operational command? And why did Patton fail to appear in the deliberation at all? The response to the initial question centered on strategic requirement. Marshall's presence was irreplaceable in the capital. He oversaw the complete military effort. He engaged with the British. He administered activities in both European and Pacific regions. He collaborated with Congress regarding financing and preparation. Roosevelt communicated explicitly to him, "I could not rest securely if you were absent from Washington." Marshall's significance to comprehensive war effort made him unsuitable for directing sole geographic operations. This left Eisenhower as the logical alternative among available commanders. He lacked experience controlling soldiers in battle settings prior to 1942. During the First World War, he functioned as an educator at Pennsylvania Training Installation. He engaged in administrative work throughout the interwar decades for Douglas MacArthur and operated in various management capacities. He demonstrated intelligence, competency, and strong regard from peers. Yet he possessed zero combat encounter prior to North Africa. What Eisenhower demonstrated was diplomatic capability. He grasped how to interface with British leaders who protested American control. He understood reconciling divergent directives from Churchill and Roosevelt. He demonstrated forbearance, diplomatic approach, and preparedness to sacrifice American tactical benefits to maintain partnership cohesion. What he lacked was Patton's combat instinct. He lacked Patton's comprehension of applying pace and aggression to conclude engagements efficiently. He lacked Patton's capacity to examine ground and identify openings faster than opposing forces could react. These represented field expertise. Eisenhower's strengths were diplomatic. What Patton lacked was everything Eisenhower demonstrated. Patton interpreted coalition military operation as a competitive framework where American forces should dominate. He competed with British commanders for recognition rather than forming cooperative relationships. He disclosed confidential material to establish personal standing. He articulated inappropriate statements regarding partners without considering diplomatic ramifications. He could not subordinate personal interests to accomplish diplomatic requirements. This explains why Patton never obtained consideration for Supreme Allied Command prior to the striking episodes. Marshall and Roosevelt understood that supreme authority demanded significantly more than field mastery. It demanded diplomatic sophistication that Patton completely lacked. Eisenhower had demonstrated this competency in North Africa. He had addressed the difficult connections between American and British commanders. He had managed de Gaulle and the liberated French. He had synchronized ground, air, and maritime operations spanning multiple zones. He executed this without antagonizing partners or generating diplomatic complications. Marshall prioritized this capability above combat experience. The France operation would demand organizing millions of servicemen from multiple populations, spanning hundreds of kilometers of front. It would necessitate supervising air, maritime, and ground facilities, intelligence coordination. It would require preserving command structure while honoring national dignity and self-respect. Eisenhower demonstrated capability for this. Patton did not. Patton treated coalition military operations as a competitive circumstance where American forces should assert superiority and British forces should accept supporting positions. Eisenhower treated it as a cooperative arrangement where competitive personalities required handling and negotiated settlements became essential. The unasked question concerned whether these compromises would increase American casualties. Roosevelt concurred with Marshall's judgment. FDR considered post-war diplomatic considerations. He recognized the United States would emerge from the conflict as the predominant power. He understood sustaining British partnership would prove essential. He recognized that offending Churchill or de Gaulle throughout the conflict would complicate post-war connections. Patton represented a diplomatic vulnerability. Eisenhower proved diplomatically dependable. He articulated appropriate declarations. He established connections rather than severing them. He grasped that military victory demanded more than tactical successes. It demanded sustaining coalition coherence throughout triumph and afterward. The question concerned whether appeasing Montgomery carried more significance than reducing American casualties. Whether alliance steadiness warranted furnishing resources to British activities that would fail while American activities that were succeeding encountered supply shortages. Whether political settlement held greater significance than military competence. Marshall recommended Eisenhower. Roosevelt concurred and conveyed he would retain Marshall in the capital where he demonstrated irreplaceability. And on Christmas Eve 1943, Eisenhower received formal appointment as Supreme Allied Commander for Operation Overlord. Patton would direct the Third Army functioning under Bradley, who would supervise the 12th Army Group functioning under Eisenhower. Patton would execute strategic blueprints created by others. He would battle with exceptional ability within the strategic framework Eisenhower created. Yet he would never exercise authority to effect comprehensive strategy. The announcement became public in early January 1944. Publications congratulated Eisenhower's appointment. Military specialists commended his diplomatic capability and organizational talent. Certain parties expressed questions regarding his battlefield inexperience. Nobody questioned whether political dependability superseded tactical mastery. Nobody questioned how numerous Americans would expire because alliance diplomacy superseded military efficiency. Patton remained unmentioned in the announcement. His assignment in the operation was protected for strategic purposes. Yet throughout the armed forces, comprehension existed regarding the circumstance. The most accomplished American field commander would never receive confidence with coalition authority. His operational capacity demonstrated immeasurable worth. His diplomatic ineptitude constituted disqualification. Marshall and Roosevelt had established that partnership management exceeded battlefield performance in significance. Operation Cobra commenced on July 25, 1944. American forces under General Omar Bradley's initial army penetrated German lines near St. Lo. Following 6 weeks of costly stalemate among Normandy's agricultural terrain, American forces ultimately accomplished breakthrough. The German defensive arrangement disintegrated and suddenly expansive territory stretched forward. Patton's Third Army activated on August 1, 1944. His assignment involved leveraging the Cobra breakthrough. He was scheduled to advance into Brittany to obtain ports supporting Allied supplies. It constituted a cautious approach, aimed at guaranteeing logistical capability before advancing further into France. Patton reviewed the strategic circumstance and promptly identified that the plan had become outdated. German forces in Normandy had disintegrated. Their western flank was deteriorating. Paris appeared vulnerable. The path toward German territory remained accessible. Capturing Breton ports would demand weeks and would lack significance should the conflict terminate before ports became necessary. Patton formulated a command determination. He would conform to the specific wording of his instructions, yet not the substance. He positioned one corps in Brittany to secure the ports, yet transmitted the remainder of Third Army eastward toward Paris and the German frontier. He implemented a calculated gamble that following Eisenhower's realization of his conduct, Patton would have advanced sufficiently that altering the strategy would prove unfeasible. The gamble succeeded spectacularly. Patton's forces traversed beyond 400 kilometers in 14 days. They freed Lyon, Chartres, and Orleans. They made contact with the Seine River and endangered Paris from the southern direction. They compelled German forces to withdraw and seized substantial numbers of detained soldiers. It constituted the most dramatic advance in American military background. Yet Patton's advance additionally generated complications. His logistical connections grew perilously extended. His mechanized vehicles experienced fuel depletion. His logistical administrators alerted him that he had overextended relative to supplies and would require pausing for the supply framework to function properly. Patton disregarded their warnings. He transmitted direction to his commanders to progress until depleting fuel supplies, subsequently to arrange fuel procurement and persist advancing. On August 15th, Patton obtained instructions to stop at the Seine River and permit different Allied elements to arrive. Patton identified an exception. He mandated reconnaissance missions beyond the Seine. Those operations commenced expanding. When Eisenhower's headquarters examined his conduct, Patton's complete military organization had positioned itself beyond the waterway, executing reconnaissance. It represented tactical maneuvering regarding instructions, not straight defiance, yet the result functioned identically. He persisted advancing when ordered to stop. By August 31st, Third Army had attained the Meuse River, almost 400 kilometers beyond designated limitations. Patton had accomplished velocity unmatched by any military organization in documented background. He had freed substantial French territory. He had eliminated numerous German military units. And he had rendered meaningless the methodical, structured strategy Eisenhower's organization had formulated. Eisenhower experienced anger. Patton had disregarded instructions. He had disturbed the complete Allied logistical framework by depleting fuel and supplies allotted to other military organizations. He had advanced such a significant distance that his exposed positions could not acquire sufficient supplies. Bradley, functioning as Patton's authority, had forfeited authority over him. Yet Eisenhower could not discipline Patton because Patton's advancement had demonstrated spectacular achievement. German forces across France were deteriorating. Paris had been freed. The Allied movement had abbreviated the conflict by months. Patton had initiated risks disregarding established concepts and had benefited because the risks succeeded. This constituted the precise explanation why Marshall and Roosevelt had never contemplated Patton for supreme authority. Patton demonstrated preparedness to circumvent instructions he questioned. He emphasized military triumph above compliance. He undertook strategic hazards minus authorization. These characteristics rendered him an exceptional army commander. They rendered him completely unsuitable for theater command, because had Patton operated in Eisenhower's position, controlling tactical decisions for the comprehensive theater, his bold inclinations would have manufactured both triumphs and calamities. He would have disregarded diplomatic constraints. He would have irritated Allied partners. He would have undertaken risks potentially fracturing the partnership. Eisenhower grasped this reality. He appreciated Patton as a subordinate, yet would have worried about him as an equivalent. The Third Army's advancement established that Patton required authority above him, implementing constraints and mandating operation within strategic limitations. By early September 1944, Allied military organizations experienced fuel depletion. The logistical framework was deteriorating. Military organizations were advancing quicker than supplies could be transporting. Eisenhower encountered a vital determination. What military organizations would acquire the restricted fuel supplies available and what organizations would require pausing? Patton desired the fuel. He contended that Third Army positioned itself nearest to German territory. He maintained capability to approach the Rhine within days with adequate supplies. He maintained potential to traverse into Germany itself and endanger the industrial heartland. He claimed potential to terminate the conflict preceding winter. Montgomery additionally desired the fuel. He stated that British military organizations functioning northward warranted emphasis. He recommended Operation Market Garden, an airborne insertion designed to obtain bridges spanning the Rhine in Netherlands. He claimed this would circumvent German protective structures and grant British forces path into northern Germany. Bradley, directing the 12th Army Group, backed Patton. He stated that Third Army's momentum ought to continue. He claimed Patton's aggressive technique provided superior likelihood of destroying German opposition prior to its reorganization. Eisenhower determined backing Montgomery. He granted the British 21st Army Group emphasis for fuel and supplies. He sanctioned Market Garden. He directed American military organizations, encompassing Patton's Third Army, to decrease their advancement and reinforce their locations. Eisenhower's determination was unconnected to military assessment. Market Garden constituted a high-hazard strategy demanding flawless execution. Patton's advancement, although daring, was functioning and demonstrated momentum. Eisenhower's determination was diplomatic. Churchill exerted pressure on Roosevelt to allocate superior significance to British forces in concluding the victory. British community sentiment demonstrated growing exasperation with American control of the effort. Montgomery communicated threats of departure, absent emphasis, and Eisenhower held conviction that sustaining partnership steadiness topped superior military approach. Patton obtained instructions to reduce Third Army's advancement. He protested strongly. He explained that stopping would grant the Germans opportunity to regroup and extend the conflict. He communicated to Eisenhower that adequate supplies would grant him competence to attain Berlin preceding the Soviets. He anticipated that backing Montgomery would produce tragedy. Eisenhower overruled him. Third Army acquired small fuel provision and received instruction to conduct restricted activities. While Montgomery arranged Market Garden, Patton expressed grievances to journalists. He leaked classified knowledge, proposing that governmental direction was overriding military efficiency. He made it apparent he believed the determination was erroneous. Market Garden commenced on September 17, 1944. It disintegrated catastrophically. British airborne servicemen experienced encirclement near Arnhem. Thousands experienced death or capture. The operation created no tactical benefit. Montgomery's standing suffered injury, and the fuel and supplies potentially backing Patton's movement were squandered on unsuccessful campaign. Yet the genuine expenditure was not calculated in British personnel at Arnhem. It registered in American servicemen experiencing death, contending with the Siegfried defensive structure in October and November, because Patton had been blocked from circumventing it in September. It registered in the lengthened conflict authorizing Germany to organize the Ardennes assault. Eisenhower's diplomatic determination to favor Montgomery had purchased momentary partnership harmony. The expense registered as American casualties and additional months of fighting. Patton considered this substantiated his disagreement. Had he received supreme authority, he would have emphasized Third Army's advance. He would have contacted German territory months sooner. He would have transited the Rhine prior to German protective structures solidifying. The conflict possibly would have terminated in 1944. But Marshall and Eisenhower interpreted conditions differently. They believed that had Patton received supreme authority, he would have manufactured greater complications. He would have disregarded British sensitivities. He would have contended with Montgomery rather than supervising him. He would have fractured the partnership, pursuing American recognition. The defeat of Market Garden did not establish that Patton warranted supreme command. It established that Eisenhower demonstrated insufficient aggression and excessive readiness to permit diplomatic factors to supersede military efficiency. Yet it additionally demonstrated that somebody had to supervise coalition diplomacy, and Patton demonstrated incapacity for this. In August 1944, German forces across Normandy experienced encirclement in a location near Falaise. Allied military organizations had positioned themselves on three boundaries. One escape corridor extended eastward. Had the Allies preserved the corridor, they could detain or eliminate 100,000 German servicemen and end coordinated German opposition in France. Bradley commanded American military organizations approaching from the southern direction. Montgomery commanded British and Canadian military organizations approaching from the north. The arrangement expected both organizations to proceed and restrict the corridor, confining the Germans within. Patton had expressed worry regarding these complications. He had contended for organizing servicemen and preserving powerful reserves. He had questioned the intelligence evaluation asserting Germany's completion. He experienced dismissal because Eisenhower and his personnel held conviction they held superior comprehension. Had Patton functioned as supreme commander, would the assault have occurred? Probably not in equal circumstances. Patton held paranoia regarding German counterattacks. He preserved powerful reserves. He gathered his military organizations rather than dispersing them thinly. He would have noted the German assembly or minimum maintained positioning to answer faster. Yet Patton's protective approach would have manufactured different complications. He would have hesitated furnishing Montgomery assets. He would have demanded additional intensity from American organizations and accepted greater casualties. He would have manufactured friction, with British commanders feeling resentment toward his aggressive manner. The Ardennes battle substantiated Patton's tactical judgment, yet it similarly shown why Marshall and Roosevelt had never contemplated him for supreme authority. Patton demonstrated execution of remarkable operational initiatives. He demonstrated catastrophic failure managing a partnership, and supervising the partnership carried greater significance to American tactical objectives than maximizing military competence. By March 1945, Allied military organizations had intersected the Rhine and progressed into Germany. Conflict conclusion approached, yet a fresh consideration surfaced. What organization would obtain Berlin? What would that signify regarding post-war diplomatic positions? Soviet military organizations proceeded from the eastern boundary. They positioned themselves nearer Berlin than Western Allied military organizations. Stalin demonstrated fixed intent to obtain the German capital, representing Soviet sacrifice and triumph. Churchill desired British and American military organizations arriving at Berlin prior to Soviet forces to avoid Soviet hegemony throughout the core European location. Patton positioned himself to achieve a rapid progression toward Berlin. Third Army progressed quickly via the core of Germany. Patton maintained conviction he could attain Berlin preceding the Soviets with fuel and authorization to progress. In April 1945, Patton's Third Army contacted the Elbe roughly 80 kilometers from Berlin. The path remained accessible. German opposition was disintegrating. Patton remained prepared to advance. He maintained the alternative to accelerate. Patton requested authorization from Bradley and Eisenhower. He contended that American military organizations ought to contact Berlin prior to the Soviets. He maintained conviction that acquiring the German capital would furnish America diplomatic leverage in post-war discussions. Yet Eisenhower determined to avoid offending Stalin. He emphasized Soviet partnership above tactical position. He complied with Roosevelt's agreements from Yalta, despite those agreements granting Stalin authority over Eastern Europe. The determination had obtained endorsement at the greatest diplomatic ranks. Diplomatic aspects triumphed once more. Patton obtained instruction to remain at the Elbe. He expressed bitter disagreement. He contended that enabling the Soviets to obtain Berlin constituted a tactical error that would strengthen Soviet objectives throughout Europe. He anticipated that Stalin would direct Eastern Europe and threaten American concerns. He maintained conviction that American military organizations ought to obtain as much German territory as feasible prior to the ultimate German capitulation. Eisenhower disregarded him. Patton's military assessment carried smaller significance than Roosevelt's diplomatic approach. Third Army halted at the Elbe and remained stationary while Soviet forces advanced toward Berlin. Patton maintained conviction that this constituted the ultimate evidence that he warranted consideration for supreme authority. He argued that Eisenhower had shown excessively great readiness to satisfy Soviet requirements. He maintained that an American Supreme Chief ought to emphasize American tactical concern above maintaining partnership steadiness with the Soviets. Marshall and Eisenhower considered aspects differently. They held conviction the determination to enable the Soviets to obtain Berlin was appropriate because battling for Berlin would have consumed thousands of American servicemen for no tactical benefit. The location would encounter division among the partners in any event founded on pre-established occupation geographic zones. Competing the Soviets for Berlin would have harmed the relationship Roosevelt and Churchill attempted forming. Yet Patton held accuracy about one dimension. The determination to remain at the Elbe permitted Stalin to strengthen authority throughout Eastern Europe. Soviet military organizations inhabited Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and East Germany. They established communist authorities for populations desiring liberty. The Iron Curtain materialized throughout Europe precisely as Patton anticipated. Whether American military organizations obtaining Berlin would have modified this consequence remains disputable. Stalin's direction of Eastern Europe rested on military occupation, not symbolic victory. American military organizations would have needed to engage them to block communist governance. Roosevelt and Churchill demonstrated unwillingness to chance conflict with the Soviet Union immediately following German defeat. Yet Patton's judgments embodied tactical accuracy. He comprehended that the post-war arrangement would encounter determination by positioning of military organizations upon conflict termination. He desired American military organizations as distant eastward as feasible to limit Soviet development. Eisenhower demonstrated readiness to permit Soviet authority throughout Eastern Europe at the expense of maintaining partnership steadiness. This discrepancy in tactical perspective constituted precisely why Patton never achieved contemplation for supreme authority. Patton thought applying military frameworks. Eisenhower thought applying diplomatic frameworks. Roosevelt and Churchill desired a supreme authority emphasizing diplomatic objectives superior to military reasoning. Following German capitulation on May 8, 1945, Patton obtained assignment functioning as military authority for Bavaria. It constituted a diplomatic function demanding diplomatic mastery and thoughtful handling of German populations. It embodied completely the incorrect function for Patton. Patton instantly manufactured disputes. He demonstrated sluggishness, substituting Nazi authorities from administrative functions. He contended that experienced managers remained essential, preserving infrastructure operation, regardless of their political background. He stated the Nazi Party resembled Republican and Democratic parties in America, merely German electoral dynamics. These declarations horrified American and British administrators. The comprehensive intent of denazification centered on eliminating Nazi existence from German culture. Patton approached Nazi membership as immaterial. He maintained better concern with productive governance than with sanctioning Germans regarding Hitler assistance. Patton additionally championed re-equipping German military organizations to battle the Soviets. He expressed declarations to journalists that the United States had conquered the incorrect adversary. He claimed we ought to have joined Germany versus the Soviets. He promoted immediate military friction with Stalin, while American military organizations maintained entire capability throughout Europe. These declarations breached formal approach and brought embarrassment to Eisenhower. The United States attempted developing harmonious connections with the Soviet Union. Patton advanced for continuing World War II. He advocated employing German soldiers, equivalent military organizations that had recently murdered hundreds of thousands of Americans, versus America's wartime partnership ally. Eisenhower removed Patton from management of Third Army and his position as military governor in October 1945. He designated Patton authority of the 15th Army, a largely symbolic organization accountable for generating the account of the European effort. It constituted a humiliating relegation. The armed forces' greatest field commander experienced diminishment to documentation preparation. Patton expressed bitterness. He maintained conviction his termination established that governmental figures disciplined frankness. He considered himself experience harassment for expressing accuracy regarding Soviet danger. He sensed authorization by his field success and disloyal action by the governmental organization. On December 9, 1945, Patton experienced critical accidents in a motor vehicle collision roughly 100 kilometers from Mannheim, Germany. His automobile contacted an armed forces transport vehicle. Patton sustained severe neck and spinal trauma, creating paralysis from the throat downward. He experienced termination on December 21, 1945, from complications connected to his trauma at age 60. His expiration preceding complete substantiation of his warnings regarding Soviet danger meant he never required witnessing the comprehensive validation of his forecasts regarding Soviet behavior. The Cold War commenced months following his expiration. Stalin applied communist administrations across Eastern Europe precisely as Patton anticipated. The Iron Curtain partitioned Europe throughout 45 years. The United States and Soviet Union confronted each other in a thermonuclear equilibrium, continuing until 1991. Patton had maintained accuracy regarding Soviet behavior. His promotion for confronting Stalin instantly following German loss carried tactical legitimacy, yet his comprehensive absence of diplomatic knowledge and diplomatic capability implied his warnings encountered rejection as the assertions of a military enthusiast not able to acknowledge the conflict's completion. Had Patton functioned as Supreme Commander, his Soviet antagonistic positions would have manufactured catastrophic diplomatic complications throughout the conflict. Roosevelt's approach hinged on sustaining Soviet partnership versus Germany. Patton would have endangered that partnership by approaching Stalin as an adversary rather than an ally. This explains why Marshall and Roosevelt never contemplated Patton for supreme command. Not due to Eisenhower's superior battlefield accomplishment, yet due to Eisenhower grasping that military triumph had to function toward political functions, and the diplomatic function encompassed sustaining Soviet partnership versus Germany. Patton could not accomplish that. He demonstrated mastery at tactical tasks. He demonstrated catastrophe at partnership diplomacy. He communicated his viewpoint frankly absent thinking about diplomatic ramifications. He competed with partners rather than creating partnerships. He emphasized military reasoning above political requirement. These characteristics constituted him America's superior army officer. They additionally disqualified him from supreme command. The accurate knowledge of why Patton never encountered consideration for supreme command constitutes a painful reality regarding partnership military operations. Military superiority holds smaller significance than diplomatic supervision. The superior battlefield officer does not consistently suit theater authority. Occasionally, the superior battlefield officer fails to participate in discussion at all. Patton comprehended fighting at a dimension his counterparts failed to recognize. He examined military background thoroughly. He comprehended operational motion instinctively. He understood employing pace and aggression to accomplish definitive outcomes. He probably constituted the superior pure field officer America generated in World War II. Yet Patton failed to comprehend diplomatic elements. He failed to comprehend that battles accomplish political functions, not just eliminate opposing forces effectively. He failed to comprehend that sustaining partnership connections carried equivalent significance to succeeding at battles. He failed to comprehend that communications regarding journalists demonstrate equivalent significance to battlefield activities. This rendered him unfit for supreme command despite his tactical mastery. Supreme command necessitates stabilizing military necessities versus diplomatic constraints. It necessitates supervising competitive personalities and organizing arrangement. It necessitates approving suboptimal military options to maintain partnership steadiness. Patton lacked capability in these areas. He lacked interest in obtaining capability in these areas. He experienced resentment regarding requirement to participate in these activities. Eisenhower comprehended partnership diplomacy. He functioned not as skilled a field officer as Patton. He would never fulfill that position. Yet he managed Churchill absent, generating diplomatic complications. He organized with de Gaulle absent, insulting French self-esteem. He maintained Stalin's participation absent, triggering friction. These capabilities held greater significance than field mastery. Marshall comprehended this distinction. He held awareness that Patton demonstrated superior military ability. Yet when Roosevelt questioned who ought to lead Overlord, Marshall suggested Eisenhower without pause, because battles obtain accomplishment not by military personnel independently. They obtain accomplishment by partnerships that could persist through triumph and afterward, and Patton fundamentally demonstrated incapacity for partnership supervision. The American armed forces structure throughout World War II mirrored this knowledge. America never granted its superior field commanders complete authority. MacArthur guided Pacific activities, yet functioned subordinate to the joint military leaders. Patton guided military organizations, yet functioned subordinate to Eisenhower. The structure aimed at guaranteeing that governmental authorities supervised approach, while military commanders performed applications. This troubled aggressive officers, including Patton and MacArthur. They maintained conviction they comprehended fighting superior to governmental figures and warranted authority, directing military achievement minus governmental constraint. They most likely held accuracy concerning battle understanding. They definitely held error regarding meriting authority independent from diplomatic management, because competitions function toward governmental functions. Military implementation represents an application of nationwide approach, not an objective by itself. Commanders neglecting this become problematic. They target military functions that contradict governmental aims. They manufacture triumphs that generate strategic collapse. Patton never comprehended this reality. He maintained conviction his function encompassed efficiently eliminating German servicemen and succeeding at battles definitively. Everything supplementary embodied diplomatic elements that did not involve him. This perspective rendered him exceptional at implementing tasks. It guaranteed he would never obtain positions requiring specifying approach. Patton's field judgments surpassed the cautious approach Eisenhower pursued. The Normandy breakthrough encountered postponement because of cautious organization. The Falaise corridor collapse permitted scores of thousands of German personnel to withdraw. Market Garden depleted assets that might have backed Third Army's advancement toward the Rhine. The Ardennes assault happened because protective locations remained thinned and reserves fell short. The data conveys the account that established background endeavored to obscure. Market Garden, 17,000 partnership casualties, 0 tactical benefits. Assets that might have maintained Patton's advancement obtained diverted to Montgomery's unsuccessful effort, alternatively. The Ardennes, 80,000 American casualties, 19,000 servicemen eliminated in the snow. The 106th Infantry Division permitted capture of approximately 7,000 personnel, America's greatest mass surrender of military forces in the European effort. These did not constitute satisfactory losses. These constituted preventable casualties happening because Eisenhower distributed military organizations thinly, attempting to make everybody satisfied. Huachin Woods, 33,000 American casualties, acquiring woodland that might have encountered bypassed, had Patton experienced authorization to outmaneuver the Siegfried fortification in September. The Siegfried fortification itself, obtained acquiring through frontline assault in late 1944, because Patton had not experienced authorization to outmaneuver it when it remained susceptible in early September. All of these casualties embodies a designation. Everybody maintains a household that obtained a military department electronic message. Everybody compensated the expense regarding diplomatic choices that emphasized partnership steadiness above military effectiveness.